Johann Wolfgang von Goethe is an absolute giant in German literature and in world literature as well. He left behind a staggering body of work, including novels, plays, poems, and letters. If you count everything up, everything Goethe ever wrote would run to over 143 volumes of books. So it can be a daunting task to figure out where to start. If so, this is the video for you. However, Goethe is a bit different from other authors. Let me explain. Goethe's importance in Germany is often compared to that of Shakespeare in England, but there is one crucial difference. We have the plays and poems of Shakespeare, but we don't really know all that much about his life. We have the bare biographical essentials. We roughly know when he was born, when he died, and where he lived. We know he married a woman named Anne Hathaway, but we don't really know what Shakespeare's personality was like, what his love life looked like. Every biography of Shakespeare is largely speculation, trying to fill these huge gaps in between the few facts that we possess. Not so with Goethe. You can make a good case that he is perhaps one of the most well-documented people in all of history. And that's very important for a specific reason. Goethe is not just admired for the words that he wrote down, but also for the type of life that he lived. Therefore, when you ask yourself how to start with Goethe, my answer would include a biography of the man, and not just his writings. A great contemporary biography of Goethe is the one by Rüdiger Safranski, entitled Goethe, Life as a Work of Art. The subtitle says it all, really. Goethe wrote that the art of writing must never be more important than the art of living. You could say that his most important piece of art is not any of his writing, but his life itself. This biography is around 600 pages and written in a clear, accessible style. It was written in 2013, so it's fairly recent, and it also has instructive tangents on those who influenced Goethe and those influenced by Goethe in turn. You basically get a small crash course in German culture from this time period, and not just Goethe himself. Safranski also wrote biographies on Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and Franz Kafka that are quite good. To get the full experience of studying this giant of culture, I really do recommend you start with a biography. But in case you want to jump into a work by Goethe himself straight away, then in my opinion, the most obvious place to start is with the book that made him an overnight superstar, The Sorrows of Young Werther. It was Goethe's debut novel, written when he was 24 years old. And it's about the titular Werther, a young man who's hopelessly in love with a woman who is engaged to another man. Werther is considered one of the main works of the German Sturm und Drang movement, which was a precursor to Romanticism. It's a short work that became infamous in Germany and in Europe for the exuberance of its emotion. It really captured a sentiment of the age, and it resonated so much with people at the time that young men copied Werther's style of clothing from the novel. Young men also copied the ending of the novel, although that might actually have been a moral panic instead of a real social phenomenon. In any case, the novel, as well as the Werther fashion style, were banned in the city of Leipzig, and for a time the novel was also banned in Denmark and Italy. If you need another reason to pick up the book, it was also Napoleon's favorite novel, and it's one of the 3 books that is read by Frankenstein's monster alongside Plutarch's Lives and Paradise Lost. Goethe later distanced himself from the novel. He said that writing it was kind of like a confession. He felt like he had to get its message out, and he felt relief at having done so. In hindsight though, the heavy emotionality and sentimentality, the romantic focus on self-destruction, was deemed by him to be a bit too excessive. I'll leave a link in the description to where you can get the book for yourself. However, if you enjoy audiobooks, there's a really good BBC collection of dramatizations of Goethe's works. It includes Werther and also the next work that we will talk about. so it's definitely worth checking out. They're not just dry audiobooks either, but actual dramatizations with actors talking to each other as if you're watching a play or a television show. They have introductions to the work as well, and fitting music in some parts. And there is a lot of bonus material too, like 3 plays of Goethe, as well as his infamous fairy tale, and even a discussion on Goethe's unique scientific theory of color. It's on Audible, and for the holidays you can even get it for free with a trial membership. If you are completely new to Goethe, I definitely recommend getting into him in this way. Goethe loved long walks and being in nature, and listening to these works while you're on a walk is a great way to familiarize yourself with them before you commit to deeper study, should you choose to do so, of course. For Werther specifically, you can just listen to it audiobook style and enjoy the story that way. Link in the description. The power of the Werther, said Goethe, is that every young man who reads it feels like it was written for him specifically. However, in the art of life, we cannot remain young men forever, and we have to grow up. Goethe wrote Werther at 24 years old. It made him a famous superstar, but he was far from reaching his peak. My next recommendation is Faust. It's not just Goethe's magnum opus, but it just might be the greatest German work of literature ever written by anyone. However, it's also difficult. That's why I recommend starting with Part 1 and seeing how you get on. Part 1 offers mostly a self-contained story. If you've heard about Faust before, chances are you've heard of this first part specifically. In this part, Mephistopheles, an agent of the devil, bets with the Lord in heaven that he can lead Faust astray, a scientist on Earth who dedicated his life to the pursuit of knowledge, but who is disappointed because true wisdom keeps eluding him despite all his years of study. Mephistopheles appears in Faust's study room and the two strike up a deal. Mephistopheles will use his magic powers to give Faust whatever pleasure he wants for as long as he's alive. And in exchange, Faust gives up his soul. But, and here Faust makes the most famous demand, his soul is to be taken by the devil only if Faust feels completely satisfied, even for just a moment. Faust thinks that by making this demand, he has outsmarted the devil, because he is completely convinced that nothing on earth can truly satisfy him. If to be or not to be is the most widely known and quoted phrase in the English language, then the German equivalent would be this wager of Faust with Mephistopheles. Faust tells Mephistopheles that if he is ever to be so satisfied with the present moment that he wishes it would last forever, in other words, if he ever says to the present moment, "Verweile doch, du bist so schön," stay for a while, you are so beautiful, then the devil can take his soul and drag him down to hell. Without getting too much into the plot, what follows are a few episodes of Faust and Mephistopheles traveling all over Germany as the devil tries to seduce Faust with pleasure after pleasure in hopes of winning the bet. It's then that Faust's eyes fall upon Gretchen, a young beautiful girl, and with the help of Mephistopheles, he seduces her and she falls in love. That's about as much as I'll say about the story itself, because you should really experience it for yourself. The best part for me personally is not the love story with Gretchen, but the dialogues with Mephistopheles, the devil. Mephistopheles is one of the most interesting and well-written characters in all of fiction. Sometime in the future I'll make a video specifically about Mephistopheles and his curious nihilistic philosophy, so subscribe if you don't want to miss it, and make sure you've read Faust by the time that video comes out. There's an English book called The Essential Goethe that has Faust Part 1 in it, along with many other works of Goethe. I'll talk about another work in this collection in just a second. The book has over 1,000 pages, and it has 3 plays by Goethe, plus Faust Part 1, a selection of poems, and many essays on science and philosophy to boot. If you read Goethe in English, this is a must-have for your collection. What I specifically like about the Faust translation is that it keeps the rhyming scheme of the original. Translations always have both advantages and drawbacks, and some translations will go for fidelity to the source material, trying to get the content exactly right, and in order to do so, they will sacrifice readability and get rid of the rhyming scheme, for example. In my opinion, it's actually better to sacrifice a bit on the content of the words if you can keep the form of the poetry more intact that way. Translation is always a difficult balancing act, and I think the English translation in the Essential Goethe does a really good job at it. You'll be surprised at how quickly you can read through the entire thing. There's a link in the description to the Essential Goethe, as well as to the other books we'll talk about in this video. But in this specific case, I have another recommendation for you. There is a fully staged performance of Faust on YouTube that's in German, but it does have English subtitles. In my opinion, this is an absolute must-watch. It's a production from the 1960s, and as far as stage productions of Faust go, I don't think we'll see a better one anytime soon. Mephistopheles is such a difficult character, and he really comes alive here. I'll leave a link to the YouTube video in the description, as well as a link to a DVD, just in case it gets taken down or something. You can watch the performance to get acquainted with the work, and then actually read the play to dive deeper into it. Faust is one of those texts that will stay with you for life, with something new to find every time you open it. There is also a full dramatization of Faust Part 1 and Part 2 included in the BBC collection I talked about earlier. Again, it's a great way to get familiarized with these works before you commit to a deeper reading. You get actual actors, different voices, fitting music, emotional inflection, etc., as if you're watching a theater play. You can listen to them while getting your steps in and being in nature. It's even free as part of an Audible trial membership, at least at the time of recording this video. Before we move on to the next recommendation, a small word on Faust Part 2. It's a much more difficult work, and it's not as accessible as the other works I'll talk about in this video. Faust was Goethe's passion project for his entire long life. Part 2 is filled to the brim with allusions to the science, religion, philosophy, psychology, economics, literature, politics, and so on of its day, as well as ancient Greek poetry and mythology. Part 1 of Faust deals with the small world of Faust in Germany. Part 2 deals with the large world of the whole universe and all of time. It's a truly amazing work, but it's impossible to present on the stage, and the subject matter is simply not as accessible as the story between Faust and Gretchen of Part 1. I recommend getting familiar with other works of Goethe before trying to tackle Faust Part 2. For example, the final novel is Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship. It's been called the prototypical coming-of-age story, the ideal of the so-called Bildungsroman. But that's perhaps not entirely true. Like many groundbreaking works, it defies neat categorization, and perhaps we can best of all call it a psychological or philosophical novel, even if it did go on to inspire the whole genre of the Bildungsroman. Schopenhauer famously called it one of the 4 best novels ever written. And considering the fact that the other 3 novels he talked about were not written in German, we can safely assume that Schopenhauer thought that Wilhelm Meister is the best German novel ever written. Schopenhauer considered it such a great novel because it does everything a great novel should do. Its focus is not on the external world, but on the internal one. It's a psychological novel in which we follow the young Wilhelm Meister as he journeys through life and gradually, through mistakes and folly, comes to surely but slowly realize his place in life. It's a sprawling novel, quite long but episodic in nature, so you can easily compartmentalize your reading. It touches on almost every aspect of human existence. Goethe also makes use of the novel to play with certain ideas, such as his appreciation for Shakespeare, as Wilhelm Meister initially moves in the world of the theater. It's no coincidence that Wilhelm's name is the German version of William. Even though, as I mentioned, it kind of invented the genre of the Bildungsroman, it already subverts the genre in many ways. Wilhelm Meister blunders and errs, but he somehow ends up in a good place anyway, and you get the feeling that maybe there is a higher power at work in Wilhelm's life, as indeed Goethe seems to say there is in all of our lives. An idea that also animates much of the action in Faust. It's hard to talk about this novel, and I'm not alone in thinking this. In fact, Goethe mentioned how people in vain try to look for a singular message in Wilhelm Meister, as if there is a key somewhere to unlock all the mysteries of the novel. But there is none, because Goethe set out to invent a life for us to explore in all its richness and complexity. And life is often a messy, irrational affair that doesn't allow itself to be captured in a single short paragraph. What is Wilhelm Meister about? That's like asking, what is life about? People seek a central point, and that is hard, and not even right. I should think a rich, manifold life brought close to our eyes would be enough in itself, without any express tendency, which, after all, is only for the intellect. But if anything of the sort is insisted upon, it will perhaps be found in this. The whole work seems to say nothing more than that man, despite all his follies and errors, being led by a higher hand, reaches some happy goal at last. Schopenhauer understood this very well, because, as he writes in his Aphorisms on the Wisdom of Life, where we were looking for pleasure, happiness, and joy, we often find instruction, insight, and knowledge, a lasting and real benefit in place of a fleeting one. This idea runs like a bass note through Goethe's Wilhelm Meister, for this is an intellectual novel and is of a higher order than the rest. Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship was followed by a sequel, Wilhelm Meister's Journeyman Years. Just like the second part of Faust, this sequel is much more challenging than the first, and it also was published many decades after Part 1. This one really challenges the form of the novel, as Goethe presents it more like a mosaic of different forms. He mixes sections of epistolary novel, short stories, and sections of aphorisms. It prefigures modernism in many ways. It's technically a sequel, but also not really. The tone is completely different this time. Whereas the Apprenticeship focused on the life of a single individual, Wilhelm, the Journeyman Years are more concerned with society at large, the issues of education, the nature of work, etc. Just like with Faust, I recommend you start with Part 1, and then if you're feeling adventurous, you can tackle Part 2. But maybe not before you've familiarized yourself with other works of Goethe. It can be tricky to get an English translation. The Essential Goethe, the compendium of works I talked about earlier, also contains this novel. So if you were interested in Faust, then you get Wilhelm Meister as well. Again, there's a link in the description. Finally, I'll leave you with a couple other suggestions that I won't get into as deeply as the others. First, the play Torquato Tasso. Based on the real history of 16th century poet Torquato Tasso, it very closely mirrors events of Goethe's own life at the Weimar court under Duke Karl August. It can therefore be read as a work standing either on its own or as a biographical exploration of Goethe's inner life from this time period. The play deals with tension between the artistic genius on the one hand and the rigid society around him on the other hand, and the effect that this rigidity has on his mental state. You can find this play also as part of the Essential Goethe, as well as in radio drama form on the BBC audiobook. Second, this BBC radio dramatization also has a reading of Goethe's infamous fairy tale of the Green Serpent and the Beautiful Lily. This was a hugely influential, short little work that has puzzled readers for generations. Everyone seems to attach a different meaning to this story, and it seems to brim with deliberate symbolism. Rudolf Steiner basically based the whole movement of theosophy upon his interpretation of this story. Its many strange images prefigure the surrealist art movement, and Schopenhauer claimed that Goethe once told him personally that there really is not that much meaning to be found at all, and that the story should just be enjoyed for the beautiful images it evokes, and the search for a deeper meaning behind it is in vain. I'll leave it up to you to make up your own mind. Thirdly, and lastly, I have to mention a book that is not by Goethe per se, but is about Goethe. Nietzsche called it the best German book there ever was. I'm speaking of Eckermann's Conversations with Goethe. I talked about this book on the channel before. We get an intimate look into the thoughts and opinions of Germany's greatest living genius during the final 9 years of his life, as his secretary Johann Peter Eckermann dutifully notes down every notable conversation he ever had with Goethe. We get Goethe's own mature opinion on his own works and how he experiences his fame and reception. We learn of his critiques of Byron, Schiller, Shakespeare, the Greeks. We learn about Goethe's poetic process, how he went about writing a poem, and what distinguishes a good poem from a bad one. A video like this about Goethe would be incomplete without mentioning this book. However, you will have the best experience with this book if you familiarize yourself with Goethe's own works first, since he does talk about them quite a lot in this book, and the author assumes that you've read them. But this definitely is a book you should have on your shelf. I'll leave a link again in the description to where you can get it on Amazon. So that wraps it up. To recap, 1. Start with a biography on Goethe, because he is admired for the way he lived his life as much as he is admired for his artistic output. I recommend Safransky. 2. Read The Sorrows of Young Werther. You can listen to it as an audiobook or read it for yourself. 3. Faust Part 1. Maybe listen to the great dramatization by the BBC, and then you can read it again yourself with the book in your hand. It's part of the Essential Goethe. Leave Part 2 for now. 4. Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship. A denser novel than Werther that you should, in my opinion, sit down with. But its episodic nature makes it easy to put down and pick up again. Part of the Essential Goethe. 5. Some miscellaneous suggestions for if you're ambitious. First, Torquato Tasso, a semi-biographical play about the tension between the artistic genius and the society around him seeking to restrain him. Part of the Essential Goethe. Second, The Fairy Tale of the Green Serpent and the Beautiful Lily. Depending on who you ask, a work of extreme philosophical insight, or just a fairy tale with pretty images. But it's short and delightful and well worth your time. Part of the BBC dramatization. Third, Eckermann's Conversations with Goethe. Front row seats to the thoughts and opinions of Germany's greatest artistic genius from the final 9 years of his life. Touches upon every topic under the sun. I'll leave a link to the book in the description, as well as to all the rest that I talked about. And that, dear viewer, is how I would suggest you get started with Goethe. Again, there's a link to everything I talked about in this video in the description. Thank you for watching. I want to thank my patrons, as always, for making these videos possible. If you want to support the channel, you can get any of the books or audiobooks I talked about through the links in the description here, and at no cost to you, I will get a commission on them. So, if you want to get these works for yourself, you will help out the channel at the same time. So thank you for supporting us. And as always, there is extra material on Patreon if you want to support us over there. A patron also recently asked me a question about Faust, and you can see my answer here. With that said, again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.